The Knicks are now close enough to a championship that it's starting to feel really dangerous. And I don't just mean dangerous for the rest of the NBA. I mean dangerous for the actual city of New York. Because I'm telling you right now, if this team wins the NBA title, there might genuinely be nothing left of that city in the following morning. But the reason this is actually worth talking about is because the Knicks are not just being carried by hype anymore. There's an argument to be made that no one has played better basketball in these playoffs than the Knicks. Their numbers are ridiculous. And this is not the same Brunson-heavy offense that had to fight for every single possession over the last few years. There are 5 things with this Knicks team that you really need to know. The first 4 are why I have started taking their championship case a little more seriously, but the 5th one is where it gets serious. The first thing we need to look at are the raw numbers. Because if you just look at what the Knicks have done so far in these playoffs, it looks ridiculous. They're number 1 for net rating at a plus 22.7. They have the number 1 offensive rating at a 128.9, and defensively, they're sitting second with a 106.1 defensive rating. Now, do we have to take this with a grain of salt? No, take it with a full cup of salt, because this is obviously still a really small sample size, and the teams that they play do matter. Atlanta shouldn't have even been in the same stratosphere as the Knicks. And Philadelphia, for as much as I thought they were going to make the series a fight, just never really got there. The defense being the second best in the NBA is impressive, and I'll talk about that more later. But the offense being number 1, that is real. Because when you watch these Knicks right now, it's not just getting hot. It isn't just Jalen Brunson bailing them out time and time again. They're legitimately moving the ball, getting a multitude of guys involved, and creating a lot more easy offense than we've seen from this team in previous playoff runs. That is the part that changes the whole conversation. Last year, even when the Knicks made it to the conference finals, so much of their offense still felt like Jalen Brunson had to save possessions from nothing. This year, it feels like the Knicks actually have a machine around him. And in my opinion, that's why they're the best offensive team remaining in these playoffs. And this brings us to the second thing that you need to know. The easiest way to see this is by looking at Jalen Brunson himself. In the 2023-24 season, he put up 32.4 points a game in the playoffs on 26.2 shots a night, which clearly led the entire postseason. And I mean, damn, that man was getting really busy. But he was doing it on just 48% effective field goal shooting because so many of the possessions felt like Brunson trying to drag the Knicks through traffic all alone. Then we get to last season and it got a little cleaner. Brunson averaged 29.4 points a game on 21.8 shots, while shooting 52% effective field goal shooting. So it was still pretty Brunson heavy, and much of the offense did still come down to him creating something from nothing. But it was moving in the right direction. Then we get to this year. Brunson is now averaging 27.4 points a game on 20.2 shots, while shooting 55% effective field goal shooting. So yes, the scoring number is down a bit, and that isn't a bad thing. It's the point. The Knicks do not need him taking 26 shots a night anymore. He's still their go-to guy late in games, but the offense around him is finally shouldering some of the burden. And you can really see it when you look at the way his shots are coming. Last season, 71% of Brunson's made field goals in the playoffs came from him being on the ball. This year, that number is down to 56%. That is a massive difference. And then when you look at cleaning the glass, they had him assisted on just 19% of his shots in the last playoffs. But now, that number is up to 36%. That is the massive jump I'm talking about. And it's the part that really matters the most. Brunson has not become less important. He's just become less isolated. frustrated. Last year, when Brunson had the ball at the top of the floor, the entire defense knew what was about to happen. So they could load up, completely crowd the space, and make him have to beat 5 guys at once who were already set and ready to defend. But now, the Knicks are making defenses work before Brunson attacks. He's coming off screens, moving without the ball, playing around handoffs, setting screens himself, and catching it after the defense has already had to shift. So when he does get the ball, he's not always starting from a dead stop against a loaded defense. That isn't Brunson sacrificing in a way that makes him worse. That is Brunson finally getting to play inside an offense that's actually helping him. And honestly, that shift might have saved their run. Because when you look back to the start of the Atlanta series, New York was down 2-1, and it really did feel like things were starting to go sideways. Brunson was forcing the issue against Dyson Daniels and Nickeil Alexander-Walker, 2 really outstanding perimeter defenders, while Atlanta's tallest available player was only 6'8". The obvious advantage was Karl-Anthony Towns, but New York were just going to Brunson, making the game way harder than it needed to be. But then the Knicks stopped fighting themselves. They started to play through the actual advantage, trusting their passing, using Cat more, and turning good shots into great shots. That was when the offense started to really look like the best version of itself. There's no question that Jalen Brunson is still the engine, but this year, New York has finally built him a car. And that's the third thing that you need to know. Karl-Anthony Towns has changed the entire shape of this Knicks team. Because as much as Brunson's role is different, and as much as the ball movement has rapidly improved, the player who makes this version of their offense possible is Cat. For a lot of the season, that was one of the more frustrating parts about this New York offense. There were stretches where Towns would just go radio silent, and everybody was sitting around wondering, how is that even possible? You've got one of the more skilled offensive bigs in basketball. You traded for him to specifically raise the ceiling of this team, and yet there were still so many nights where it didn't even feel like he was the third offensive option. That right there was the whole issue. It wasn't that Cat wasn't capable of doing these things. It's that the Knicks were just not using him in a way where he could. But now, all of that has changed. And a massive credit to head coach Mike Brown here, because the way New York are now using Cat just makes so much more sense. When Towns is allowed to catch the ball at the top of the key, that right there might be the best version of this team's offense. From there, he can see the whole floor, run dribble handoffs with Brunson, hit cutters going backdoor, flow into pick and rolls, and if the defense gives him space, he's perfectly comfortable pulling up from 3 above the break. And that right there is what makes him such a weird matchup problem. If you attempt to guard him with a normal center, Cat drags your best rim protector away from the rim. Now the paint is open, the opposing defense is stretched, and if the big steps up too high, Cat can also just put the ball on the floor and get right by. So that leads teams to try and put smaller defenders on him, but if you do that, he still has enough size and skill to really punish that as well. So he isn't just spacing the floor, he's making the defense have to pick their poison. That is why his passing has been so effective. Towns isn't just catching the ball and looking to score it every time. He's connecting possessions. He's finding the next action. He's letting Brunson move around him instead of Brunson having to create everything against 5 defenders. And when your big man can shoot, drive, pass, and run an offense from the top of the floor, that completely changes your offensive ceiling. But what's also really impressed me about New York in this playoff run is how the floor of this team just feels like it's higher. And that gets us to the fourth thing that you need to know. The Knicks role players are really starting to find themselves at exactly the right time. This team came into the playoffs with some really important pieces looking shaky, but now Mikal Bridges found his confidence in round 1, and Miles McBride found his in round 2. Suddenly, the group around Brunson and Cat looks a lot more reliable going into the conference finals. Starting with Bridges, he was horrendous early in the Atlanta series. His confidence was completely gone. He was missing wide open looks, and it got to a point where he was getting benched. But after putting up 24 points in that closeout Game 6, he's looked like himself ever since. And against the 76ers, he put up 17.5 points a game on 69% effective field goal shooting, along with 1.8 steals. Then for Deuce McBride, he's basically had the round 2 version of that. His jump shot was not quite there after coming back from the hernia. And Mike Brown tried to use him as a point guard in that first round series, and that really did not go well. But when he's playing next to Jalen Brunson, his role just makes so much more sense. And in these playoffs, the Brunson-McBride minutes have a plus 28.7 net rating, a 131.8 offensive rating, and a 103.1 defensive rating. Then in Game 4 against Philadelphia, this man caught fire, finishing with 25 points on 7 of 10 shooting, and all of those makes came from 3. Then you've still got Josh Hart doing Josh Hart stuff. Mitchell Robinson comes off the bench and has been a monster on the glass again, and the biggest swing piece in all of this is OG Anunoby, because before the hamstring injury, he was averaging 21.4 points a game on, get this, 73% effective field goal shooting and 54% from 3. I mean, that's unreal. And the good news is that there's real optimism that he's going to be available to play Game 1 of the conference finals. And if he can come back fully right, then their ceiling and floor both rise at the same time. So now, the Knicks are not just relying on Brunson and Cat anymore. Bridges and McBride have both found real confidence, and OG Anunoby might be coming back at the perfect time. And now we get to the most important thing that you need to know, and it's the reason why I still can't fully buy in. Because as much as I do like what New York are doing, and as much as I do believe in their offense, there's still a difference between looking like a championship team and actually surviving a championship matchup. Now, before we start talking about NBA Finals matchups, I don't want to completely skip over Detroit and Cleveland, because they're not just cardboard cutouts sitting in the way. Detroit has actually been a really difficult matchup for the Knicks, beating them in all of the regular season matchups, and that's because they've got the length to really bother Brunson with guys like Asar Thompson, and then on the other end, they can really test the exact defensive problems that I'm about to talk about. Because different to Philadelphia, they're not trying to force touches to a big man. The Pistons pretty much run everything through Cade, and if he's able to hunt switches against Brunson and do it over and over again, things could get a little murky. Now, I still think that New York could solve that by just sending a lot of bodies at Cade and making the rest of this Pistons team beat them, especially with how rough the Pistons offense has looked in these playoffs. Then we get to Cleveland, and that's a little more interesting, because you've got the double big look with Jarrett Allen and Evan Mobley, and we really haven't seen what this matchup looks like now that James Harden is in the fold. That obviously changes a lot, and from what we just saw from this Cleveland team in Game 5 versus Detroit, they're certainly not going to be pushovers. But with the way the New York Knicks have been playing right now, I genuinely believe that they should beat either of these teams and be in the NBA Finals for the first time since 1999. But this is where the conversation changes. Because if the Knicks get there and the matchup is Oklahoma City or San Antonio, I'm not going to sit here and just lie to you. I wouldn't be picking the Knicks. I just wouldn't. Now, that doesn't mean that the Knicks are totally fake. It just means that beating the Eastern Conference versus having to beat the winner of the West are two completely different things. The best way I can explain it is this. From a team defensive standpoint, they've been great. Mike Brown has this group bought in. They're mixing and matching coverages. Cat can play drop coverage, or he can come out to the level where they can hedge, blitz, rotate, and force the ball into the hands of the guys that they'd rather live with. We saw that in the Philadelphia series series, and it was absolutely real. And I'm not trying to take it away from them. When the Sixers were running those high screen and rolls with Tyrese Maxey, the Knicks did a really good job of showing high at the level, taking away the pull-up three, and forcing the ball into bad three-point shooters' hands like Kelly Oubre or VJ Edgecombe. Jalen Brunson actually deserves a bit of credit here, because he's been way more bought in defensively than we typically see. But against the Thunder or the Spurs, that may not matter. I thought Tyrese Maxey's processing was a little bit off in that second round, and I don't think Shai Gilgeous-Alexander would have the same problem. I really do think that Oklahoma City could strip the game down and make it really simple. Get SGA a favorable matchup, which would be Brunson, and then just go at him. And that brings up a brutal question. Can your weakest defender survive against our best scorer? The answer to that question in a series versus OKC is clearly no. And because of that, you're going to have to send help. But once you start to send real double teams at SGA, mate, you're asking for trouble. Because Shai isn't just a bucket getter anymore. His playmaking has taken a real leap. OKC have athletes everywhere. They've got enough guys to knock down shots, and now New York has to rotate perfectly behind the play. To me, that's a nightmare. The Knicks are good when 5 guys are solving the problem together, but if OKC can get Jalen Brunson on an island, or even Cat on an island against SGA, it becomes a lot harder to rely on your team defense. Then when you get to San Antonio, that's a completely different problem. Their defense basically puts a fence up at the rim and says you're not coming in here. Wembanyama zones off the rim. Then the other 4 defenders run you off the three-point line, and suddenly the mid-range jump shot becomes a premium in that environment. New York does have guys who can make those shots, particularly Jalen Brunson and Mikal Bridges. The ball movement would matter a ton in this series because you just can't stand around against San Antonio and expect one guy to solve everything. To me, the wild card in this series is absolutely Cat. With Towns playing the 5, Wembanyama would have to guard him, and that means Cat can pull him away from the paint. Continue to run your actions at the top, and punish him with above the break threes if he drops off too far. But then on the other end, he'd have to guard Victor as well. And if Cat starts fouling like we know he's prone to, I think the whole matchup would get really ugly really quickly. Brunson versus Stephon Castle would be really difficult too, but Cat versus Wemby might be the matchup that would decide this series. To me, New York has a much cleaner path to winning against the Spurs than they do against the Thunder. And I think you could probably talk me into picking New York to beat the Spurs in the NBA Finals. Then going back to the East, if you want to see how Cleveland just stole the series away from the Detroit Pistons, then you need to go watch this video right now.